My name is Amy Julian. I am the director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. We are very excited to have you with us today to talk about equity through the website accessibility. I added the "the" in there. With me today is Brittany Boston, who is our Associate Director for Equity and Outreach, and Kirsten Baer, who is our Online Marketing Manager. I need to write your title down. For the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. So we're all excited to have you with us today. Our next slide, we're going to talk about a little just to introduce you to who we are. So ICSPS was founded in 1977, Illinois State University. We create, support, and deliver professional development for career technical educators across Illinois. And we have been doing this for my tenure with ICSPS is somewhere around 16 years, so not quite to that 20-year mark. But we have been providing technical assistance, developing publications, facilitating program improvement strategies for our partners during that time. Brittany has been with us for quite some time, and Kirsten is new. She came on with us last March, and now she actually gets to be back in the office. So she's March of 2020, and now she's back in the office. So very excited to have us all together again. Our focus at ICSPS is on transition, recruitment, retention, completion, and we encourage the achievement of special populations. And if we go to that next slide, we'll show you what those special populations are, just in case if any of you are new to career technical education, adult education, or are wondering, what that means. We're talking about individuals with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, students pursuing non-traditional occupations for their gender, English learners, youth experiencing homelessness, foster care involved youth, military connected youth, single parents parenting teens and pregnant mothers, and then out of work individuals. As we proceed through this afternoon, I want to go over a couple things. We do have a chat function. If you have not seen it, it's popping up there. There's all kinds of great things in the chat, so be sure you keep your eyes on the chat function. All of you are currently muted. And so if you'd like to speak at any time as we move through here, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can unmute you. We've got some great content for you. And then we will open up the floor for questions as we go along. And in addition to that, there is a fun little function where you can raise your hand and that will allow us to see you as well. There is a Q&A. If you do want to post in there, we will get to those, but I really encourage and direct everybody to the chat. Other thing with the chat is when you do hit the chat, you want to hit that little down arrow and make sure you're posting to everyone so we can see you. So you're able to post that so everyone can see what you're chatting about. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started and walk through our agenda for our little afternoon together. It's Tuesday after Thanksgiving, everyone, so it's been a week. What we're going to cover in the next hour together is strategies and tips to improve accessibility of your website. So exciting stuff, little things that you can start doing today to really improve accessibility of your website. We're going to talk about ways to utilize your website as a recruitment tool. So that's going to be exciting as to how you can do some fun work to encourage individuals to visit your website and learn more about your programs. And then I'm hoping that throughout the time together that you nod your head, you smile, and maybe you scratch down a note or two. So that's what we're going to be doing together. So the first thing as we move forward, it's kind of a declarative statement is our next slide. We're looking at your web page is the gateway to your program. And that's one of the things that if you want to look at, and I'm really seeking out the silver linings of the pandemic recently and trying to find ways to look at the upside of what we've all experienced over the last 2 years. And one of the silver linings is that we do have an opportunity to relook at how we recruit and relook at the way in which we are having an increase of accessibility to our students. And your website is going to be the gateway to your program. So we have less students coming to campuses to look at your programs, less students coming on campus. They're really sitting at home, looking at what they want to do, and they're looking at your website for information. So it is more of a declarative statement there, but I want you to be aware that your website is the gateway to your program. So that's why we're going to talk, all three of us today are going to talk about website accessibility and how to make sure our websites for our programs are as accessible as possible. As we move to the next slide, it's a fun little question. Ensure that there's a clear place to go for answers. So one of the things that I really challenge you to look at as you're looking at website development is what can you do to ensure that there is a clear place to go to get answers, and look at it through the lens of a student. What are those things that students are going to be asking as they're coming to your programs, looking for requests, looking for signing up, looking for registration? Are there a clear place to go for answers? And then set your website up so it's responsive. We want to be sure that when people are asking questions that they're getting a response. It does not have to be immediate, though those immediate chats are pretty fun, and Kirsten's going to talk about those as well. But in addition to that, how can we set up our website that if somebody does ask a question that they do feel heard and responded to? So next slide, we're going to talk about review your website to ensure that it is intuitive, accessible, easy to navigate, and inviting to potential students. And this is just one of those things that I actually stole this little graphic off, but a successful user-friendly site consists of the following qualities: that it's mobile friendly. And one of the things that's important with that is that you want to not have a website that is a scroll palooza, if you will, but you want it to be able to be mobile friendly, that you're able to find the information you need, that it's accessible and it loads quickly. Have you ever gone to a website, especially now? We just finished up Cyber Monday, and maybe you were, trying to get a sale as you're walking to the bathroom at work. And one of the things that you wanted to do was, make sure that site loads quickly, or else you're going to lose those customers, because a lot of people are looking for that instant gratification. Organized and easy to navigate content. You want individuals who are coming to your site to find what they need when they need it and not have to search around and do too many clicks. And then compatible with popular browsers. One of the things that is always a little alarming is if you go to a website and the top of it says do not open in Safari or do not open in Microsoft. We want you only to open in Chrome. That's one of those things that does kind of limit your users. So be sure that your website is compatible with other browsers. With that, I'm going to hand over the floor to Kirsten Bear, and she's going to walk us through some accessible web design tips. Kirsten, welcome to the party.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Amy said, my name is Kirsten Bayer, and I work for the center with both Brittany and Amy. And my new title, give Amy some grace, it did just change, is Digital Communications Manager. So I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in communications, and then my role within the center is to do all things website, including focusing on our website accessibility for our individual websites that we produce through the center, and then also providing PD for all of you regarding your institution's websites. So I want to solely focus on today the top 10 accessible web design features and items that we want to talk about and make sure that our websites are encompassing. So even if you are not the website developer at your institution, or the website liaison or poster or marketing specialist at your institution, whatever that person's title may be, you can still check your accessibility on your website and potentially find some gaps that your institution is lacking in, some gaps that your institution's website has, and then get with that website developer or get with that department within your institution to make sure that you're meeting the accessibility needs for everybody. So it's important to have accessibility on our websites. That's what I first want to define, because not only is it important for equity, inclusion, and diversity reasons, but overall for just a humanistic perspective as well. And it provides your institutions with a lot of benefits also, because you're expanding your potential audience, and potentially having a very well accessible website can put you a step ahead of other competitors and other institutions who may not have taken all of these accessible steps to make their website as accessible as possible, or who aren't even aware of these accessibility variables. And so this allows you to kind of define yourself apart from your competitors. It also allows you to make your website more flexible and more future-proof along the way. So it minimizes the amount of changes that you're going to have to make in the future by having your website already accessible right now. So the first one that I want to focus on is use onboard formatting tools to create and provide appropriate labels. Verify structure by using onboard accessibility features. So you might now be asking me, Kirsten, what does this mean? And basically what the first tip of the top 10 accessible web design features means is that each website has a central management system, or a CMS. And so you're probably familiar with some of these. Some of these are WordPress, if you've ever heard of WordPress. We use a lot of WordPress here at the center or Joomla. There's also Squarespace and a bunch of other CMSs that are out there that you can go Google right now, CMS, Central Management Systems, and Google will show you all these different ones that you can actually create your own website for free. But a lot of institutions' websites are going to have one of these main CMS systems. So either WordPress, Joomla, or Squarespace, or you might even use your own CSS and HTML CMS management system that your institution has. So all of this might sound like gibberish to you, but if you are not a part of the website, whatever department at your institution that handles the website, whether it's your marketing department or communications department, they are going to know what you're talking about. And the CMS systems always have onboarding tools for accessibility. And so they already have accessibility features kind of plugged into the CMS system. So whatever the CMS system is that your institution is using, you just want to make sure you're using all of those features that are available to you that your CMS is already providing. The second top 10 is include alternative text for all images, complex image groups, graphs, and tables. Hopefully you're already doing these kinds of things as you're teaching your students and you're using things like PowerPoint and stuff like that. We always want to make sure we have alternative text. Alternative text acts as a replacement if the picture fails to load. So it's actually good for people without disabilities as well. And sometimes alternative text is called alternative attributes or alternative descriptions or alternative tags. You might even notice this when you're teaching and you use some sort of LMS, learning management system, like if you use Canvas or a different LMS, a lot of those LMSs also incorporate alternative descriptions when you're doing like pictures and stuff like that in your LMS. So same thing applicable to our websites. We want to make sure we always have alternative text for all images. If you have a complex image group, graphs and tables. It helps, the reason we have it is because it helps our screen readers to read the picture. And this can also benefit your recruitment and retention strategies as well, because when you have alternative text on a website on a picture, this also helps you improve your website SEO. SEO meaning search engine optimization. So when you Google something or I mean, pretty much everyone I know uses Google, but Bing or another search engine on your browser that you use whenever you're Googling or search engineing your website. This helps improve your SEO, your search engine optimization, by having those alternative texts on your pictures and your tables and graphs that are already on your website. The third tip is to provide alternative access to information provided visually or through audio. And alternative access might look like something that's pre-recorded audio or video media and could also include audio tracks for information. And so we want to make sure we have things like synchronized captions, subtitles. This can be really time consuming if your institution doesn't have features like what kind of you see right now on this Zoom platform where we have live closed captioning. And sometimes even this live closed captioning isn't as accurate as we would love it to be. But having those synchronized captions, typing out those subtitles, making sure that any video that you put on your website, like if your website has a YouTube channel, making sure those subtitles are edited. A really nice feature that YouTube has is, and I know Vimeo and other third-party video platforms have it as well, is the ability to read your closed captioning and subtitle it automatically for you when you upload the MP4 video file. And then you can go through and just edit them because they're not going to be as accurate as we would like them to be, right? Especially for accessibility reasons. YouTube has the annoying capability of always lowercasing people's names or some misspellings of bigger words that you might have used verbally throughout your video. And so you want to just double check and make sure that all of those subtitles are accurate, but it is quite the time saver whenever you are going through and watching any videos that might be on your website. So just making sure we have those synchronized captions and subtitles for accessibility reasons, and providing that alternative access both visually and through audio if needed. The fourth Top 10 tip is to provide methods to stop visual and audio effects from playing automatically. Repeating sounds, flashing lights, or automatically moving sliders can cause problems related to user experience. And so if you've ever logged onto a website and they have a big video that starts playing right away, has anyone ever done that? You can post in the chat or raise your hand. But not only is that extremely annoying for us, I know that's happened to me sometimes, like even at work before, we're all sitting in cubicles and someone logs into a new website and the video plays extremely loudly, right? And you have to turn your volume down. Not only is that distracting for people without disabilities, but it can also provide a real issue for accessibility reasons. And so automatic audio effects can not only be annoying for us, but they can be a bigger issue in terms of accessibility. Sudden playing of a media file can confuse or frighten some users with disabilities. Also, we want to try to avoid automatic carousels or automatic sliders. A lot of homepage websites have that. And the reason for that being because a lot of people, when you're looking at a website, you think, oh, they have an automatic slider with the pictures or videos that are continuously going on, right? Or continuously playing. And you think that's a really cool feature, which it did used to be, but it actually provides a real issue for accessibility because some viewers and some people who are using screen readers or other tools for accessibility reasons, they might need a little bit more time to absorb all the information or absorb the alternative text of that picture. So if you have a slider who's continuously carouseling through, it doesn't allow them that ample amount of time. So to absorb all that information before moving on to the next picture or the next slide of information. So it's important that we don't have those as automatic features as well. And then the fifth top 10 accessible web design is, let me move my Zoom here so I can read off the screen. All functionality is available through keyboard commands. So if any function cannot be achieved through arrow keys or tab function or enter function on a keyboard, then the user has to be prompted to do it. So this is definitely a big one because most screen readers or most other accessible technologies that people with disabilities use are mouse free. And so they use a keyboard focus or keyboard friendly mentality. And so your website must work without the use of a mouse. This is because of assistive technologies. They rely on keyboard only navigation. And this is actually really easy for you to test if you go to your institution's website. Simply don't use your mouse and only use the arrow keys, the enter, and the tab keys to access documents or access links on your website. If there's things that you aren't able to access by doing this, then this is an accessibility issue and a gap that your institution's website is having, and definitely something we want to get fixed so we can be fully accessible on our institution's websites. The sixth one is to choose colors carefully. I know this might seem kind of, obvious to some of you, but color is not used solely to convey important information. This is a big one that I see. So a lot of us are aware that we don't want to use like colorblindness colors together, right? But a lot of people on their institution's websites will use color to convey important information with context or markups. And so we don't want to assume that colors will signal emotions. Like we don't want to assume that having text in red equals bad or a warning or watch out to our potential students or potential community members coming to our website, and that we also have sufficient color contrast provided. Colors to avoid are green and red, green and brown, blue and purple, green and blue, light green and yellow, blue and gray, green and black. And you can look those up pretty easily to know which colors to avoid. The seventh one is to enable resizable text. So most browsers and devices have this enabled already, but if it's not supported on your site, that can actually break your site's design features, and it can make it difficult to interact with your site. So you want to make sure that this is accessible as well. And you can actually test this yourself by just going to your institution's website on your browser and doing the zoom in, zoom out feature on the browser. And if your website's scalability fluctuates with you zooming in and out, then you are meeting that accessibility need. If not, then you have a gap in your institution's website.
Kirsten, can we revisit real quick those color carefully? Because you mentioned a lot of colors there, and I like green. So is it the color combination that is the issue, or is it, because like I've always heard you can't use yellow. So can you talk us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so if you go to like ADA website accessibility, you can do your own searching of colors to avoid. But they're on the ADA compliance for website accessibility, their main colors to avoid are the color combinations of green and red, both on images and in terms of text, green and brown, blue and purple, green and blue, light green and yellow, blue and gray, green and gray, green and black. So those color combinations. So whether it's in terms of like green and black text together, or whether it's in terms of your background is black and your text is green. Most websites, and this is pretty website functionality, website accessibility 101, colors are, but a lot of what I see nowadays on websites in general, but even institutions websites also, is that use of color in terms of emphasizing a point, or like register now for spring semester classes, right? And that color being in red or being in
Mm-hmm.
a more dominating color. And so we want to try to avoid assuming that color itself is going to signal emotions or signal action, because that is seen a lot on institutions websites and websites in general. So not just having register now in red is going to signal an action for your potential students, because those who are colorblind might not be able to differentiate the emphasis on that being red. And so we want to use other things like exclamation points or underlining it, or maybe a different kind of font on your website if that's available to you, to emphasize that action and that call to action. So that's the big issue I see. But if you have questions about colors to avoid on your institution's websites or color combinations, that's easily something that you can search. But those are the main ones that the ADA compliance gives.
Well, and those color combinations too, speaking as someone whose father and my oldest son are both colorblind, when you have those color combinations, they can't differentiate between those shades. So if you have, a dark blue and then a black, it all looks the same to someone who has a specific type of color blindness. And so that, like Kirsten was saying, that point of emphasis that we thought was being made is completely lost because they can't differentiate between those two different shades.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brittany. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit for all of you. And if there are any questions, you can ask in the chat. The next one is number 7, which is I already covered number 7, excuse me. Number 8, to turn off auto features that cause problems for users with disabilities. So this is similar to making sure that your videos and your audio don't automatically start playing in that auto carousel or auto slider that we already talked about, but also making sure things that are on your central management system are turned off for auto features, things like text wrapping or extending of modules. So modules on a website, and their modules are called different things depending on your CMS. So like if you use a WordPress website, it's called a module. If you use a Joomla website, it's called an article. So there's different terminology depending on what your CMS is, but it's basically like any little section. So if you see a website and it has a slider of pictures, that's a module. If it has a calendar of events, that's a module. So that's kind of what I'm referring to, excuse me. But making sure that those things don't expand on the side and extend as you add more things to them, lengthening your website and lengthening that scrolling, like what Amy's saying. So it's important within your central management system to have those things capped off on your calendar of events, on your things like your home page. And so you want to avoid those automation features that your CMS already has enabled in them, because it can cause problems with users with disabilities, because it creates that continuous scrolling like Amy was talking about at the beginning of the presentation. And so that's not something that you can easily fix if you're not someone who has a back-end access to your website, but it is something that you can easily test by simply going to your website, seeing where those gaps are. Like if you have a calendar of events on your front page, or maybe you have a calendar events tab and you go to it and it's just a continuous scroll. There should be an accessibility option to have your calendar of events be like the month or the year. And so having those available, and not just a continuous scrolling, is kind of what I'm talking about. And a lot of CMSs have those auto features turned on where it does just continue to add to the page as you scroll down. And so you can actually cap those off, or get a more broad picture by doing things like the whole month of the calendar events and having that be a viewable option. So that's what I'm talking about on number 8. On number 9, use hyperlink text to provide context and inform the users of destinations. So for people who are visually impaired, this is really important to have your hyperlinks or your URLs provide context and inform the users of the destination specifically. So especially if you're a website like our website has so many resources, it has so many PDFs, so many videos. All we do is our whole website is PD, right? Professional development. And so we just have all these resources. So having each one of those PDF resources having a very specific context URL and inform the user of that destination if they are visually impaired. So that way, when their screen reader is reading to them the URL, they're able to determine exactly the document that they're reading and they're looking at. And then number 10, create content with accessibility in mind. This is just overall. So you should keep numbers 1 through 9 on this list when you're also developing not only the website itself and all the accessibility features, but the content that goes on your website, the information that you're sharing, the documents that you're sharing, your fillable forms that I know all of your institutions' websites have, tables, PDFs, all of the content that your website is housing that's important for your students also needs to follow ADA compliance and all of these accessibility options as well. And also doing things that are little simple things that you might not necessarily think of in terms of accessibility, but are very important. So things like making sure you fully write out acronyms and give all of your links those unique descriptive names are little things that might kind of go by the wayside in terms of your institution's accessibility, but are very important for those who need those for accessibility. So just as your site should be usable by anyone, so should your content, and that's all across the board for anyone who discovers your website or any content that's on it. I'm gonna hand it off to Brittany, I believe, unless there's
No,
any.
it's back to me again.
Oh,
But
well,
I do want to
I was going to jump in just for 1 second.
go ahead. I
We
was
were
just going to
just
say,
talking
if
about
there
how
are
we interrupt each
questions,
other.
yeah, we do, y'all, sorry. But if there are questions, go ahead and post those in the chat. If you do want to be unmuted, feel free to unmute. But Brittany, yes, please comment.
Yeah, so I was just saying, so when you're looking at this top 10, it really is focusing on accessibility in the sense of individuals with disabilities. However, as Kirsten was talking, it just got my wheels turning. I also want to make sure to make the comment that if you have a program or an agency or an entity that is supporting or looking to provide support to individuals whose primary language is not English, your website also needs to be translated into other languages as well. Now, I am not techie enough to tell you how to do that. I do know it is a possibility. And I would imagine a lot of the community colleges and similar entities already have that on their website, but just another thing to be aware of and double check. And especially if you have a large population within your local community whose primary language is not English, making sure that all of that information that is on your website is able to be translated on the website as well.
Awesome. So we're going to shift a little bit. And as we said, the title of this was Equity Through Web Accessibility. And we also led with talking about the idea that your website is your biggest recruitment tool. So I want to shift a little bit. We've now covered all those top 10 things for web design. There are some great resources in the chat if you didn't see those. We have 3 documents that are on our website. One is for secondary, looking at website things that you can do top 10. One is for post-secondary top 10. And then there is a checklist that we developed specifically for this webinar that you can go through and have a checklist for your website. So I encourage you to look at all of those things. Some of you might be sitting there in the same seat that Brittany and I are in, are like, yeah, I know what I want it to do, but I don't know how to talk to my tech guys or tech women to get that done. And that is also something we can help with. If you want some help with language or what are those things to use. Kirsten loves when I say, I want the thinger dinger to work. That is a very technical term that I use often. And it's not how that works, but she does know the lingo on that, and that's fantastic. So I want to shift with us to really tips for recruiting. We're going to talk about just some fun things to be thinking about, and all this does tie back into your website and web accessibility. So first thing is get excited about challenging the status quo. As I said, I am searching out the silver linings of the pandemic because there's 2 options. We can either sit and say, okay, this is what has happened to us, or we can say, I'm going to find the good, the excitement, the opportunities that have presented themselves, and I'm going to move with them. And life is just too short for me to just sit and, squalor. So you can't fix the problem with the same thinking that got you into trouble. And that is something that, ironically, I was having a conversation with my kids about this morning. But the idea is that if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So if we're looking at that we're having barriers to recruitment, we're having barriers to engagement with our students, how do we fix this problem with a new way of thinking? How do we look at different ways to engage with our students? And many of us are either teaching online and in person, some variation of the two, teaching totally in person with the supports online. And I want you to think about this way. Those of you who are faculty out in our audience today, I want you to think about, okay, I'm not necessarily responsible for recruiting into my institution, but I'm absolutely responsible for retention, because if the students don't feel welcomed and they don't feel that they belong and they do not have that sense of belonging within my institution, they're going to go somewhere else. So how can we really encapsulate that? So we're going to talk about these 3 E's for successful recruiting. The first one is engage. So we have engage, equip, and empower. And I like E words. If you didn't know that about me, there's a little fun tip. I like E words. And the first one is engage. So give your students, your fans, whoever you're engaging with, the gift of you. And by that, I mean engage with them. Listen to what they're telling you. Be a part of the conversation about your brand, about your students, about your program. Engage with your students. Be present when they are there with you. Be present in their responses. So look at the ways in which not only as a program, so we'll take it in different slides, as a program, if somebody emails you and asks a question, or texts you and asks a question, or tweets about you and asks a question, respond. With your students, I teach on Teams, so Microsoft Teams, if they're responding to me, I'm responding back to them. We also have a, I don't even know what platform it's on, but it's ReggieNet, and it notifies me through email, so then I have to get through my 232 emails each day to figure out if my students have engaged with me. So I like something that instantly pops up on my screen. So in Microsoft, if anything pops up on Teams, because we're a Teams college, it pipes right up. There are some great, let's take some tips from the big people in marketing. At Nike, support is a prime example. They constantly respond to their followers on Twitter about their apparel, about what's working, about what's not working. They engage. And that is something that we need to do as educational institutions as well. Every minute you can watch and engage with your students is really going to be a great return on your investment. The next thing is that tricky part, equip. Give them a reason to talk. It can be about your class. It can be about what's going on in your class. It can be about your program. It can be something that is people seek out your program for or your institution for. But find ways to engage with them. Be amazed and be energetic about the way in which you equip your students. One of the things that I want to talk about is that Apple has revolutionized technologies in devices and delivery and amazing products and customers, allowing them to naturally race, to that newest iPhone. I'm hoping to upgrade at some point from my 7, which just sits here and kind of grinds on my desk right now. But the idea is that evolve your program. One of the things that in the education space that I always say is I don't teach the same class every semester. I teach to the students. So you're not teaching the same class over and over again because you customize it. Kirsten, you know that. You teach all the time. You customize the class. You have some content, you have some benchmarks, you have things you have to accomplish, but equip your students with those tools so they can ask those questions. Also, when looking at recruiting into your program, equip them with what they need to ask. Same thing with your website. Are there questions? So for example, one of our websites is about the civil rights review process. And we have like 4 questions on the front of that. How do you engage with your students? How do you equip them with the information that they're seeking? We also do that with our autism training and technical assistance project. We say, what are these populations that you fall into? And then we're equipping them with that information that they need to move forward. And then the last E is empower. Give your students different ways to talk and share. Allow them to navigate in the space that they choose to navigate in. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of work lately with adult education, and those of you who are in that adult education space, they're talking about how do we recruit in. And our population is very diverse. Some individuals want to pick up the phone. Some of the individuals want to email. Some want to just text or chat, tweet. But give them, empower them to have that choice. Let them know that they are important to you and that sharing their opinion is important to you. One of the crucial things that we make a mistake as an institution, as a family member, as a teacher, is we ask for people's opinions and then we don't use it. Don't ask questions you don't actually want the answer to. So empower them to give input where you want input. So for example, with my students, I don't ask them questions about the benchmarks for my class. Those are set by the institution. I have to teach to the benchmarks, but I can ask them questions about delivery. I can ask them questions about engagement. I can ask them questions about specifics around content. And so allowing them to have that power, but also meeting students where they are is so very important. Empowering them to have a way to talk, share, engage. Again, when they come to your website, does many of your websites, because I've been on a lot of them, have that little automated guy that pops up? The site that I just went to that I put in the chat that we were talking about with the ADA toolkit, some of those have a little site that said, hey, I'm Austin. There's not really an Austin. We all know that. It's a bot, but still it's the idea of somebody is popping up saying, what can I help you with? What are you here seeing? What brings you to this conversation about accessibility today? And that's that empowering for our students, those 3 successful recruiting strategies. So we're going to talk about some evidence-based practices, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Brittany to walk us through what are some of the things that we need to do to dispel stereotypes to allow students to feel welcomed in our space.
Yeah, okay. So we have our website fully accessible, right? Everyone can get on there, they can access it, they can navigate it with ease. We have that perfect website set up. So how do we use that website to benefit our programs, our institution, and to benefit our potential and current students? And if you have listened to either myself or Amy talk about recruitment in any way, shape, or form, then a lot of this stuff might be information that you have heard before, because it is those evidence-based practices. These are those practices that have been shown time and time again to be successful and to work when it comes to promoting potential students. And as Amy had mentioned, dispelling those stereotypes is key, whether you're talking about using your website as a recruitment tool or social media, whether you are talking about word of mouth from students or academic advisors or counselors or instructors, whatever the case may be. You want to make sure that there aren't any hidden stereotypes or hidden bias when that information is being presented, because when we are promoting our programs to potential students, we are promoting our programs to all potential students, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, ability, disability. The list can go on and on, right? We are encompassing all of those students. And I'm going to go through some of these evidence-based practices, and they're pertinent to recruitment overall, but we're going to make them specific to our website for the purpose of the conversation today. And so when we're looking at that website, as Kirsten had said, when you have those sliders of pictures or using those visuals on those websites, we want to make sure that we are being as fully representative of not only the student body that we currently have, but the students that we are recruiting and promoting our programs to in the future as well. And so when you're using pictures on your website to promote it, make sure that you're showing students actually working, showing them in the classroom, showing them learning, engaging, hands-on, especially for those CTE programs, showing them in those labs, those facilities that they are working and learning in. And again, including pictures of those individuals in context. And that in and of itself can help reduce those stereotypes by showing them in that element where it can show sort of that personality and identity of those students. So if we can go to the next slide. And again, I'm going to reiterate this as much as I possibly can, but being intentional with our language, with our imagery, and making sure that we are representing all students. And now you can see this lovely little stock image on the screen here, and it's fantastic, but it is a stock image. And so we know that when we're using images, the ones from the community college themselves, the ones from the institution themselves hold more weight, right? They create a bigger impact to see actual students within the actual program and community college that's being represented and promoted. And so real images are great, but if you are trying to diversify your student population, those stock images come in handy as well. And just making sure that we are promoting and marketing both online and printed materials with that, those diverse individuals and representing all potential students. And so we'll go to the next slide. Okay, and so again, like I had mentioned, we want to show that diversity, but we also don't want to necessarily call any particular population or single them out when we are promoting our services or recruiting for individuals as well. And so that's another thing to be aware of, both with the imagery and the language on the website. And again, if you've seen any of our previous webinars, we talk about those super strategies and just being very aware of the language that we're using and promoting all of our services, all of our information and recruitment materials to all of our students. We want to make sure that the information is shared across the board so that it kind of, again, I'm going to keep saying that's my tagline for the day, it dispels those stereotypes, it breaks down those walls, maybe that uncomfortability of having to ask for those additional supports. If we share that information across the board to all of our students, both current and potential. Using common language. Now, we know whether you're in the secondary system, post-secondary system, adult education, CTE, whether you're an employer, we all have our own little language, right? We all have those bureaucratic terms. We speak in acronyms. It's alphabet soup sometimes. So look at your websites, review the terminology that you're using. If you have acronyms, make sure that we're spelling those out completely so that if you have a student or a parent or a potential student come online and look at that, they know exactly what you're talking about. And making sure that maybe we're using more broad terms. So for example, special populations, some of our students may not know what that is. One of the special populations is students interested in non-traditional fields. They may not know what that means. We know what that means because we know Perkins and we know that that's one of the special populations, but making sure that we are using that common language and not our alphabet soup everyday terminology that we tend to even forget that we're speaking in. And so just being mindful of that on the website and making sure that we're checking that everything's spelled out and sharing those acronyms so that they do know what it means, but making sure everything is spelled out and trying to avoid that bureaucratic language as much as we possibly can.
And Brittany, I want to interject there just real quick, because non-traditional has become very, I don't know,
It has multiple meanings.
overused lately. So I
Mhm.
was literally last week presenting at a conference where I was presenting about the special populations in coordination with students who were presenting about how to have inclusivity in your classroom around gender bias and non-binary students, and how do we help students identify and provide teachers with mechanisms for ways in which you can make your classroom more inclusive. And so the teachers during this first, it was kind of a 15 minutes, and then 30 minutes together, which was so much fun. But at the same time, it was one of those things that they kept using non-traditional when talking about students who are identify as transgender or students who are LGBTQ plus. And so when I got up and I said, okay, a special population is non-traditional students, I had to set those boundaries. I had to level set and say, but for special populations, we are meaning those students who are represent 25% or less in a gender of, these areas. And so I think it's okay to do that. I think actually encourage us to do that, because in the collegiate field, when I say non-traditional, some people think that it's non-traditional age-wise. So if I'm 50 and I'm heading back to school, I'm a non-traditional student. But if I am a woman engaged in the STEM occupation, I'm a non-traditional student. And so I really think making sure that we level set, making sure that we use not only common language, but explain what our terms mean. The other fun thing is when I say career in CTE, I mean career and technical education. However, when I go to a faculty meeting at ISU and I say that I've been working with CTE for 20 years, they're like, wow, that's impressive, because it's something with tenure evaluation over in the College of Education, and I have nothing to do with tenure evaluation. So just taking that extra step to look at it not through the lens of what we see and do every day, but looking at it through the lens of our general public. And it's okay to oversimplify. It's okay to over-explain, because two things. One, we've all been in a virtual realm for so long, and that's really one of the big keys to engaging with people in Zoom is over-explaining. So could be why I'm telling this story now. And two, because we want to make sure that people are getting the information they need. And so if I'm sitting here thinking that I'm a transgender woman and you said non-traditional, and I think you have support services for me because I'm a transgender woman, and then when I get there I don't, I'm going to be disappointed. However, if I'm a young woman looking to go into a STEM occupation and you've defined that, then I'm like, wow, that's pretty exciting. I can do that. So just making sure that everyone is understanding what the messaging is so very important.
Absolutely. And I think a good rule of thumb that we have in our little center is when we create, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation or tools that we provide to the system for professional development, we have multiple eyes on it, because we all have our little niche, however you choose to say that, but we all have our little areas, right? That I hate the word expert, but I'm going to use it, that we're experts in. And so being able to have someone else look at it who maybe isn't as familiar with that content is great, because then they can say, okay, but Brittany, you say X, Y, and Z here. What do you mean by that? I don't fully understand what you're meaning there. And so if you have a program specific web page, Facebook page, whatever the case may be, having somebody, maybe it's a CTE page, so having somebody in adult ed look it over and say, okay, what exactly does this mean? You use this term here. What does that mean? Can you explain on that a little bit more? Is great to make sure that, because when we're recruiting for potential students, they may have no background knowledge to our programs whatsoever. And our website may be the first time they're encountering CTE or adult ed or whatever the program may be. And so having someone, I don't want to say on the outside because that sounds, but for lack of better words, having someone on the outside of that look at that website and be able to fully understand and know exactly what's being marketed and promoted there is a great tool to use as well. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, and so as I mentioned Facebook there. So when you're recruiting, using multiple forms of media to market. So website is fantastic. It's great. As Amy said, over the past, how many months are we going on? Creeping up on 2 years here. We've been largely virtual. We're all starting to come back a little bit more and more. But technology has been a dominant component in our lives for the past 18 months. And so websites are fantastic, social media is fantastic, but we also know that there are individuals who, it's crazy, I know, but there are individuals who don't have social media. There are individuals who, I learned the other day, still listen to the radio. And so putting ads on the radio as well, not just Pandora, not just Amazon Music or whatever the other ones are, making sure that we are using multiple forms to market our programs, because it's not, in some cases, it's not just the potential learner or student that we're trying to reach, it's also family members, right? It may be a parent, or it may be a sibling or an aunt or an uncle who comes across that and is like, oh, you know, my nephew, he's looking for a program just like that. And I heard on the radio the other day, so I'm going to tell him about that. So making sure that we're using those multiple formats and taking advantage of the technology that we have, in a sense, been forced to utilize for the past 18 months. Let's use it to our benefit. Using gender inclusive language. Amy just mentioned how she had done the presentation, and they were talking, you know, about non-traditional and what that meant. So making sure that we aren't being gender specific, right? We're using gender inclusive language because we are promoting students of all genders, all backgrounds. And so looking at our websites and making sure that we haven't maybe haphazardly or unconsciously been specific when we're talking about certain programs or certain services or entities within our institution, using that inclusive language across the board. And then again, really using those photos and those testimonials, which I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a minute, but using promotional materials from current learners and completers or graduates of the programs, because we know that their experience, their success within the program is one of the best recruitment tools that a program has. So, and I think the next slide, we're actually going to go a bit more into detail on that. We are basically exactly what I just said there. So those success stories matter. Those students who have moved through your programs, whether it's CTE programs, adult ed programs, and been successful, they are your biggest recruitment tool, because they can speak firsthand to the supports and services that your institution was able to provide, the instructors, the advisors, all of the ins and outs that make your program what it is and that help support your students, they can speak to. And so our next slide will go into a little bit of how we can utilize those. And so when we talk word of mouth, right, back 2 years ago, it was, we thought maybe like conversation, right? In person, I just happened to bump into such and such, and I told them all about my experience at Joliet Junior College. Well, now that's completely changed. And we have to rethink what we think when we think of word of mouth. So that can be texting, that can be tweets, posts on Facebook, resharing tweets. As I think that's what they do. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know if we share tweets or retweet, sharing posts on Facebook. All of that is still considered word of mouth communication, because it is all still coming from firsthand experience of a current student or a completed student. And so one of the ways that you can utilize that on your website, and I've seen several community colleges do this, is having a student success in blank, whatever program or entity you are trying to promote, and having a section on your website that highlights stories from current and completed students. And so you can, get a release and have their photo and have maybe some general questions that you ask of, why did you enroll into a CTE program? What made you choose enrolling in welding? How has, Joliet Junior College helped you be successful within the program? And Joliet Junior College just came to my mind. I don't even
And
know that they
even
have a
building on
welding
that,
program.
Brittany,
Mhm.
giving the students, back to that engagement, giving the students an opportunity, or equipping them with an opportunity to share if they want to share. We all interact with a lot of different students, and some have good experiences and some have not as wonderful experiences. But at the same time, giving them an opportunity for voice is so very important. And you can look through those and maybe you share some of the great ones, like maybe Kirsten loves her experience and maybe Brittany didn't, but there's always something to learn from asking our students those questions. And it also gives them an opportunity to share, to say what I loved about what I did, what I loved about my time at Heartland or Parkland or Richland or any of the other lands across Illinois. It allows them to do that, because if you don't do that, then you're stifling their ability to be heard. And that word of mouth, think about, again, back to, we just wrapped up Cyber Monday, right? And Black Friday. When you're looking at things to buy, where do you look? When you want to go to a restaurant in a new town, where do you look? Or even in your own town, you look out there and you look at those reviews. So if we can share, do what all the restaurants do, share some great reviews of our programs, share our success stories, allow our students to have voice, that is so very important. I was actually on a call earlier today and they were talking about developing personas, and it was shot down a little bit because the idea of a persona and not a real person takes away from the authenticity of the experience. So allowing our true students to have their voices heard is so very important. Sorry, I'll stop interrupting. Probably not.
No, you're good. We're getting kind of close to time there. It flew away from us. But yes, and I think, who doesn't love bragging about themselves a little bit, right? And I use that term very loosely. But the population of individuals that we work with, um, give them that opportunity to, shout their success from the rooftop, right? That's the whole point, is we want our students to be successful. Give them that opportunity to brag on themselves for a little bit. And like Amy said, even if you have students who maybe their experience wasn't, movie quality, right? As a program, we can still learn from that. Where were those gaps? Where did we fall a little bit short when it came to maybe supporting that student, or what was missed that as an instructor, as an administrator, we don't necessarily see on the day-to-day because we ourselves are not a student moving through that process. So we can go to the next slide. And I had mentioned some social media platforms before, some using those as that multiple means of marketing. But does your program have a social media presence? I would imagine a lot of your institutions do, but can your specific program, and I say can because I'm not sure what certain policies and guidelines your institution may have, but can your specific program have a Facebook page? Have a Twitter account? Can you have a College of DuPage CTE Facebook page? And on that Facebook page, we're promoting everything that COD does within their CTE programs. Are you utilizing TikTok and all of the other social media platforms that are out there and that are ever changing? Do you have a YouTube account where you have those promotional videos or interviews of students who have moved through your program? That's another way to do it as well. Maybe it's not a flyer that you have on the website. Maybe it's actually a YouTube video of an interview that you've done with your students. Are you utilizing social media to promote your programs and to reach the populations of individuals that you are trying to recruit into those programs? So we'll move to the next slide. And again, this further goes into that sort of leveraging new technology. Like I said, I'm not on Twitter. I don't use Twitter, but I know it's a great tool in order to communicate with others, in order to promote things. And so finding what works for your team and your program, starting small. We don't need to have, a website and a Facebook page and a Twitter account and a YouTube account and a TikTok, right? We don't need to have all of the things, but maybe do one or two, and start somewhere, right? And then engage with potential and current students. Again, those are your biggest recruitment tool right there. They can speak to what the day-to-day is within that program, the supports, the services, enrolling, what that process looked like for them. So making sure that we are utilizing and engaging them in the recruitment process as well. Okay, so we can go to the next. And then again, when we talk recruitment, we're also talking retention, right? They go together. So making sure that we're following up with students, whether that is through email. So maybe you had a student a previous semester and you notice that this semester is starting up and you don't see their name on that list. Don't be afraid to reach out to them and say, hey, just checking in, wanting to see how things are going. Call or text students, right? Follow up on social media. Facebook has the Messenger, and I think Instagram has a Messenger app as well. Utilizing the entities that we have at hand to get in contact with our students. We know sometimes phone numbers can change, cell phone numbers can change, but it's and email addresses can even change. But those social media platforms stay pretty consistent. The accounts on social media stay pretty consistent. So making sure that we're not only, once we get them in our program and get them in the door, fantastic, that's great, that's wonderful, but we want to keep them in our program as well. And so we have to continue those conversations and continue following up with them. All right, so we'll go to the next slide here. So we want to hear from you guys. So in the chat, can you share one strategy that you're going to take back to your program when it comes to recruiting participants within your website, and then one strategy that you'll take back to enhance your accessibility of your website? And so we'll let you share that in the chat. And then I think our next slide is some resources. And so while you're typing away on those, we'll share some resources. And these slides, the recording from today, the slides, all of the top 10 docs checklist that we had mentioned, those will all be posted on the website, and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to all of that. So you'll be able to access all of these as well.
As well as an
Amy,
evaluation, but I did throw these in the chat. I threw all the resources here. So if you want to link and run, you're welcome to do that. And then I also threw the compliance standards in there if you want to link to those and run. Again, if there's something that you're like, you know what, I don't have basketball tonight till 7 o'clock. I really want to check out this checklist. I need to look at what that does. So please do that. I do want to open the floor for questions. We've done a lot of talking and I know we're kind of at time, but are there any questions from anybody in the audience? Feel free to raise your hand and unmute or post those in the chat. We can click through to that final slide and kind of, I'll let you take us home.
Sorry, I was taking a drink of water there. Yeah, so I noticed we didn't put our emails on the last slide, but I would imagine a lot of you already have them. If you don't, we can put those in the chat. But if you have any questions about website accessibility in general, please feel free to shoot us an email. We have a civil rights website, and we have in the process are building out an equity and career and technical education website. Now, both of these websites are getting facelifts right now. They're getting some work done. So I'm not going to provide the link because if you looked at it right now, it would just ruin it for you. But all of that information is going to be at your fingertips. And I'm very excited for when those are done and we can get those released to you guys, because it will go into so much more detail on accessibility, universal design for learning, special populations, civil rights reviews. All of that will be covered on those websites.
And then the last plug I want to give before we wrap up is, if any of you are looking to have conversations about equity or about diversity, equity, and inclusion on your campus, we have recently put together, in partnership with the Community College Board and the Southern Illinois Professional Development Center, we created conversation starter videos. And I've used these in my class, I've used these in trainings, and they're a really nice way to get a conversation started around anti-racism, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, around how do we get involved? Those are on our website under equity, equity resources. So I do encourage you to check those out. And again, there's going to be more resources. We will be sending an evaluation with all of this fun little gifts that we're sending out to you. And so we do want to hear from you. We are always wanting to hear what the system wants, and we really do develop our professional development around what you've asked for. So if you have an ask, please make it, and we'll be happy to develop our professional development for you.
So in the chat, we had some people who did respond to their takeaways. And so Lacey says, hopefully try to utilize some success stories either on the website or social media, which we're so grateful that you took that away from this presentation, Lacey. And then Sherry said, I found that information regarding following up with the students on social media, etc., to be extremely helpful. It is so important to stay in touch with our, in my program, to stay in touch with former students. So I personally do this with my students, and I find it to be really helpful in not only retention, but also recruitment. I put in the chat that your retention is directly correlated to your recruitment efforts, which is directly correlated to your website and your accessibility efforts. So it's a domino effect, right? And so making yourself as an instructor accessible as well, not only throughout your semester or your time with your students in the classroom, but also afterwards using that social media. I always encourage all my students to follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn after the semester is over, because I don't know about you, but whenever I was going through my schooling, I always reached out. Even now, I reach out to past professors for letters of recommendation, for just help with content that I'm now engaging in the workforce that I took a class on prior to, or even just some encouragement as your students are entering the workforce from their instructors, from your past students. So making yourself self-accessible as well is great. We had someone say, we hired a recruiting person in our department this semester. I will share my notes with her and suggest that perhaps she contact you all, us, the center, for suggestions that may assist her in recruiting students. Thank you for your expertise. I agree with Sherry. Keeping in touch with former students is extremely important. We are all a family. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that takeaway. Amy or Brittany, do you want to kind of close us out? I know we're way over time.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you guys so much for hanging on there with us. We can get kind of lost in the weeds, and we will have more coming out next year, right? Because we're going into 2022. How did that happen? About website accessibility, and we'll continue to provide professional development on accessibility across the board as well. So be sure to keep an eye out for those. And yeah, thank you for joining us back from the holiday for a webinar right off the bat. And we appreciate your feedback and your comments, and all of these resources will be made available to you on our website. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.